Be me, 8 years ago. Family, dad, buys into a hunting farm up north. Nice place, probably 400 acres altogether, and then opens up into a national forest. Easy to get lost in if you stray too far from the main trail. Lots of springs with the best water you've ever tasted. Anyway, I, being a young lad of 15 at the time, adventured off to find one of these springs. Friends and I had an interest in setting up a still to make moonshine. We were 15, booze was hard to come by at the time. How we were supposed to do this was beyond me, but we knew we needed cold water. So I was out looking for a steady water source. I spent a lot of time going deep into the property looking for a good out-of-the-way one a hunter would be less likely to stumble upon. Find one, good clear-tasting water, and up next to a cliff-like face. Difficult to see from above or below. Spend the next couple of hours clearing leaves away, making a nice little fireplace, etc. Watch the sunlight dip down. No problem, I took the ATV out, I can make my way back. Spend a few more minutes listening to the woods, the birds and the wind. Looking back, it was probably the most at peace I'd been in the woods for quite some time. The first thing that made a flag of the fuck run up in my head was that it got real quiet. Actually, quiet isn't probably the right word for it. I mean, silent. Not a single breeze blowing, not one bird chirping, nothing. Zip. Zero. Suddenly, nostrils are assaulted by this terrible odor. Imagine if a skunk and a turkey vulture fornicating on top of a rotting carcass. Slowly, the odor changes from overpowering stench to just death. Seriously, there's no way to describe it. It just smelled like death, kind of like wet moss in a mausoleum. Again, all this is to the soundtrack of nothing, only the wood popping in my fire. I actually think the lack of sound is what gave me the heebie-jeebies at first. Noticed two lights out in the distance, up high, above the trees. Strange type of light too, like the kind of light you'd see on a fogged-over glass. It's not really projecting anywhere or lighting up anything, just kind of burning so you can see it and nothing more. Mind is running through possibilities of what it could be, already beginning to nope between the smell of death and the silence. Notice lights are getting closer, and they're next to each other. Notice that they're only 20 or so feet above the trees. I'm already with my back flat against the cliff face at this point. I've already decided that whatever this thing is, I don't want anything to do with it. It was probably close to 70, 80 feet tall, with the head of a buck, those eyes with that dull light. The stench was overpowering at this point. As it moved, it didn't knock over the trees, just kind of meshed through them. I could see that the deer's head was mangy, and it looked like stuff was leaking out of it. All I can say about the body is that it was big, as I had bigger problems when it stopped. It paused for only a moment, parallel to my campfire. If it looked down, it would have seen me, but it only paused, sniffed the air, and then in the largest bound I've ever seen, darted away, headed north. After making sure that I was indeed alive, I lit the fire in the ATV and tore off back for camp. I don't think I slept for 2 months after that. So my cousin's learned his lesson about never fucking driving loads without a gun, and he ends up needing that gun in another story I could tell. It's not really paranormal per se, but if people are into hearing it, I'll write it up. He's also learned, like a lot of drivers do, that the real money is out west, driving long-ass hauls to various podunk old mining towns still trying to stay alive in the mountains and or the desert. That's big, open, unforgiving country, and there aren't many people willing to, and or capable of, driving across it for 12 hours trying to beat a deadline. There are even fewer drivers you can count on to do it consistently, since just about all the ones willing to do it in the first place are souped up on meth, coke, or whatever the fuck else will keep them up long enough to see a delivery through to completion. My cousin, as we've established, is clean, and has been for a long fucking time. He's a hard worker, he's desperate for cash, and he's got a good van. He doesn't make excuses, and he doesn't get pulled over driving loads of shit he hasn't weighed. All this means that my cousin is a very in-demand man, and what's more, it means that he ends up doing a lot of high-leverage jobs. Jobs that need to be done quickly and correctly, and as such, jobs that pay very, very well. Our second story begins with my uncle being asked to do just such a job. A good, trustworthy dispatcher has a client who needs a shitload of parts delivered to his business in Flagstaff for an order that needs to be assembled and sent off ASAP. They need the parts by tomorrow. Problem is, my uncle is in Denver and that's an 11-hour drive through hard mountains and desert. Making matters worse, the load is technically too heavy for his van. The client is desperate, however, and the dispatcher is willing to pay a ludicrous amount of money to get these things there on time. I'm talking $3,000 for 11 hours of work, with gas paid for. So fine, my cousin, called him Uncle in the last post. I've always called him Uncle Bill since he's so much older than me. I assure you that he is in fact my cousin and not my uncle. Hooks up with the dispatcher and they load the van as full as it's ever been. If a cop pulls him over, my cousin is fucked. He sets out plenty early after a full night's rest. Most of the drive is uneventful, though a cop does pull alongside my cousin in Utah and eye him suspiciously before peeling off to pull over a speeder. My cousin heads south through Navajo Nation just as the sun begins to set. This is his first time in the nation and he's going in with the darkness. Yes, you do know where this is going. It's creepy out there in the middle of nowhere, my cousin says. He happens to just get the most beautiful night, stars as far as the eye can see, and he feels like his van could just lift right off that old-ass highway and float off through them. He's passing the time pleasantly enough, thinking back to time spent on the reservation back in the Midwest, We're part Ojibwe, when something catches the corner of his eye. Black blurs flitting along the very edge of his brights, off to the left and way far ahead. He turns his head as he drives past, but of course he can't see anything since it's dark as hell. But the shapes persist. He rubs his eyes, shakes his head, and tries to refocus on the road. But they're still there. He's gone several miles now, but the shapes are staying in front of him. He wonders if there's something wrong with his headlights. Maybe a dead bug on one of them. Then there's a long, flat patch of desert illuminated by the moon, and he gets his first good look. Wolves, maybe a quarter of a mile directly to the left of his car. Nah, one wolf, running weirdly, but keeping up with him. As soon as he thinks this, the wolf starts to lag behind a bit, and he has to deliberately remind himself to pay attention to the road so that he doesn't veer off of it. But when he checks back, the wolf is still lingering, still a quarter mile off, still shuffling weirdly, about perpendicular to his blind spot. He's losing it, he decides. No fucking way, right? But the wolf keeps going, and then something happens, my cousin says, which he will never forget. He doesn't like to tell this story, or any story really. He's a quiet dude, and in fact only told me after we had seen one another for the first time in over a year, and after we had been up all night at a family event, but he swears it's true. Disturbed, he checks for cops and bumps his van up to 80 miles per hour, trying to leave the fucking weird-ass cheetah wolf behind. For a second it seems like the wolf is fully behind him and he's satisfied. But then, the hair on the back of his neck stands up and he breaks out in a cold sweat. Something twitches in the corner of his eye. He looks over his shoulder. It's the fucking wolf. It's keeping up with him again. Only this time, it's running on its hind legs. My cousin takes a double take, eyes bugging out of his fucking head, and floors it. Then the wolf takes an angle of pursuit. He's frantically looking over his shoulder now and back at his speedometer, hardly glancing at the road. The wolf is drawing closer, even as my cousin pushes the pedal down. Before too long, the wolf is running on the edge of the road. Then, slowly, it starts to veer across the other lane. About a mile ahead, my cousin sees two big headlights barreling down the opposite lane. He decides he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that semi hits the fucking wolf because he is in a full-on fucking adrenaline-fueled panic. Gulping, sweating so badly his hands are slipping on the wheel, breathing loudly through his mouth. The wolf keeps inching closer. Finally, my cousin flat out floors it with everything he's got. The engine whines, straining against the heavy load. The semi barrels towards him, and in the instant before the semi hits the wolf, blaring its horn as loudly as it can, the wolf is right next to my cousin's driver's side window. I've never heard Bill lie before. This is what he says happened. I don't know what to believe. It presses its body flat against his car and it stretches into black shadow. Eventually, he swears it takes on a humanoid form with exaggerated facial features that it's pressing against his window. As the semi blazes past, it smashes its huge eyes and Cheshire cat grin flat against his window to the point where it fogs up on the outside. He can't tear his eyes from its eyes. It's the most malicious smile he's ever seen, and something feels wrong, icy cold in the very core of him. Once the semi is past, the thing leaps away, shrieking with ear-splitting laughter and perching on a nearby rock. My cousin can hardly breathe, and he vomits into the seat next to him and continues to floor it. The thing stays behind, screaming and gasping with laughter. He makes it to the drop, still fucking cold and nauseous. He can't look the client in the eye. He smells like vomit, and he tells the client his story. Again, Bill's very quiet and very private dude. He must have been shaken to say anything about this shit to a stranger. The client is certain that he's drunk, and my cousin never delivers for him or drives through the nation again. At the urging of one of the co-workers at the client's warehouse, Cuz goes to see a Navajo medicine man who brushes him with feathers and gives him a blessing. My cousin pukes again and feels right as rain. And that's the story of the time my cousin met a skinwalker.